This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Do you think that you should be able to create a gun at home, make your own gun, using your own parts that you created, you bought on the internet from an unlicensed or unregistered dealer, or that you actually made for yourself, maybe even with a 3D printer with no serial number on it? Do you think that that should be immune from regulation? You shouldn't have to register that gun with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives? Just have it be what's called a ghost gun. Is that okay with you? Because it is okay with Maga. Because Maga right-wing Republicans, including their chosen judge, a Texas judge named Reed O'Connor in the federal court in Texas, has ruled over and over again that ghost guns are a special breed of gun. It was homemade. And therefore, what? Our founding fathers thought there'd be a 3D printer one day. And that wouldn't require registration, and it would make them exempt from normal background checks and fingerprinting? Yes, according to Reed O'Connor. Reed O'Connor and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has been the bane of the Biden administration and their public policy almost since he took office. Remember Reed O'Connor? Reed O'Connor is also the person that thought that he was more powerful than the commander-in-chief, Joe Biden, and the head of the head of all of the military branches, including the Navy and the Marines, and that he alone, as a Texas judge, could stop the commander-in-chief's order that all people in the Navy, including SEALs, had to get vaccinated during the height of COVID. That Reed O'Connor, the one who went so far that even Brett Kavanaugh on the right wing of the Supreme Court said, that's too far, and struck him down and reminded Reed O'Connor that he was not elected president, but that Joe Biden was. So Reed O'Connor's had it out and has looked for ways to kind of stick it to the Biden administration in every way, shape, and form. And his latest way is allowing, by way of federal court injunction, allowing people to make their own guns and not have them registered and not tell the government about them, which could be literally opening the floodgates of a tidal wave of guns created at home by a lot of bad people, not just upstanding citizens, are going to be making ghost guns, and have them be in the hands and the government not have any idea of the inventory of guns that are in this country. Does that sound like a good thing? No wonder under Republican control and Republican and the NRA blocking legislation, we have so many people dying in where they worship, where they study, and where they work, let alone in their homes. And this is part of the reason, because the Republicans think that the government should not only should be in your bedroom, but not in your bedroom drawer where you keep your handgun, and that the government shouldn't have any idea, no inventory of what kind of armament its citizens are walking around with. That, to me, as a thinking human being, sounds like a bad idea. And even the Supreme Court has chastised Reed O'Connor over and over again. In its most recent decision that just came out, for the third time, they almost literally, had to bench slap Reed O'Connor. Because not only did he not follow their directions, treating the Supreme Court's ruling like it was aspirational only. Like, do it if you feel like it. Like, it's a may, not a shall. Look, when the Supreme Court, I may not agree with most of what this right-wing Supreme Court does, especially when it comes to civil rights, voting rights, women's rights, and the like. But when they make an order and they issue a decision and an opinion, it has the force of law since 1787 in a case called Marbury versus Madison. That's how the co-equal branches of government got established. It's not established in the literal text. That's the ironic thing. The Supreme Court right wing are textualists. They like to say it has to be in the literal text, except when it comes to the power of their own branch, because that didn't come from the literal text. That came from John Marshall and the first chief of the U.S. Supreme Court at the time, right? The very first, in a case called Marbury versus Madison, which law students, which I was some amount of years ago, study at length to understand the Supreme Court. That's an irony that never gets a lot of attention. that they like to point to the document, except when they can't find their own powers in the document. And then it's like, okay, let's look somewhere else. But even they will, when they have a judge who's rogue, who's not following their directions, want to make it clear that when they speak in words of commandment, like shall, not permissive language like may, right? It's not pretty please, will you follow? Because otherwise the whole thing would collapse, right? If we just sort of, F the Supreme Court, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. We'd like to do that in some circumstances, especially when it comes to women's rights, civil rights, voting rights, racial equality, and the like, but we don't, because then we would just be completely in an anarchy with no rule of law. We're supposed to be a country that follows the rule of law, not the rule of men, or white men, or right-wing white men, to be more specific. So what happened here? Just to kind of give the timeline of why Reed O'Connor is a rogue federal judge and the Supreme Court is struggling and how to force him to do the right thing. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives issued a ruling that regulated ghost guns that were made at home, homemade guns, made with parts picked up on the internet from suppliers and or made in 3D printers, however the gun was created. It required those firearms to comply with firearm regulations, just like any other firearm. You bought at a gun show or a gun shop or you imported or whatever, including background checks and fingerprinting and the like, and other rules about guns, like when you're a felon, you're not supposed to have a gun, a condition of release from a crime that says you can't have a gun. You committed domestic violence, you're not supposed to have a gun. All those things, not ghost gun, any gun. And the couple of manufacturers ran into Reed O'Connor and in August of this past year, got an injunction by Reed O'Connor against that law going into effect and applying. So we've had ghost guns, let's be frank, being created around the clock, I'm sure, in people's homes, right? Good guys and a lot of bad guys, while we've been waiting for the Supreme Court to figure out what to do. And so the Biden administration ran to the Supreme Court, and in August, that's like almost a day later after the injunction, by a 5-4 decision in an emergency appeal, got the injunction by Reed O'Connor to stop the enforcement of the law blocked, right? Blocking the block, if you will. For those that are wondering, the 5-4, who voted against that regulation? Who's pro ghost gun, unregulated, at whatever volume in America? Guess. Here, I'll start it off by giving you all four. Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, Justice Gorsuch, and Justice Kavanaugh, of all people. They're okay with ghost guns at that moment, but the tide will turn, and we'll talk about that next. It then went back to Reed O'Connor for another request for an injunction by the same two parts manufacturers after the case had been affirmed by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, again, a heavy Republican right-wing leaning appellate court. And Reed O'Connor entered the injunction again to stop it again, which led the Biden administration for the second time to run to court through its Solicitor General and argue that the floodgates and tide of untraceable ghost guns was at our shores unless the Supreme Court did something about it. And in that one, finally, October the 2nd, the Supreme Court imposed another injunction issued another administrative stay to stop Reed O'Connor's injunction from going into effect, meaning the law could be applied to ghost guns while the Supreme Court continued to consider it. And that expired on the 2nd of October. On the 5th of October, the Biden administration returned to the Supreme Court and said the trial judge and the Fifth Circuit are ignoring you, Supreme Court, and your stay. They've issued another injunction to stop this rule, this very sensical, common sense rule of gun regulation of all guns, including ghost guns, from going into effect. In fact, the government called out the Supreme Court which I think did the trick, and said in their filing, the Fifth Circuit is effectively countermanding this court's authoritative determination. In other words, Supreme Court, the Fifth Circuit and Reed O'Connor are flipping you the bird. And what are you going to do about it? Now that got even Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, and or Kavanaugh got their you-know-what in a bunch, because now you're talking about the power and authority of the U.S. Supreme Court and a rogue circuit and a rogue judge, which they've handled before. And now, with a new opinion, not signed, but with no dissents, at least none that we know of, they've blocked Reed O'Connor's adjunction again, allowing the regulation, the rule by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to be applied to ghost guns. That just happened this week. That's a really good thing. And it's a rare victory for Joe Biden and his administration and the policies that they ran on, that the American voter voted for in overwhelming numbers. It's a victory for them too. It's a rare occasion. And I think it only happened, to be frank, because Reed O'Connor went, so far beyond the norm of what a federal judge should be doing in the face of clear shall mandatory language from his bosses at the U.S. Supreme Court that he left them no choice. Right? He dared them to put him back in his place. He has a boss. It starts with the Fifth Circuit or the appellate court above the trial judge, but then it goes all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is the ultimate judge on issues within its jurisdiction. And so we're going to continue to follow whether it's a good news or bad news at the U.S. Supreme Court. They're open, right? The gone fishing sign has been taken off. They're open for business. October 1st, or the first Monday in October, the Supreme Court has started again, is already hearing oral argument. I've reported on a couple of them on hot takes, including about voting rights and racial gerrymandering. Other hearings, they've rejected some cases that they don't want to hear. They've brought up other cases that they do want to hear and will hear and make rulings over them over the course of the term, which ends towards the summer break. We'll report on it on Legal AF, leading podcast at the intersection of law and politics. One place only, the MeidasTouch Network. You're on it now. You're watching me on the MeidasTouch Network, on their YouTube channel. Free subscribe. Help them get bigger. It matters. If you like what I'm doing, give me a thumbs up right here. It helps with the algorithm. I almost said the logarithm. Helps with the algorithm and my ratings, and keeps me on the air, bringing you this content that hopefully you enjoy. Watch me on Wednesdays and Saturdays with my co-anchors and co-founders of Legal AF, when we bring you the best 5 stories at the intersection of law, politics, and justice, right here on an audio podcast also that ends up on every platform where you get your audio podcast from. Until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting on ghost guns.
Hey, Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.